Hey, Matt,
Hey, how's it going, Mike?
I want to welcome everyone to our very first movie film roll review. The purpose is to give the opportunity to see what these available film stocks look like so
hmm
you could plan your creative project.
Yeah, when anybody's starting in like the motion picture stuff, it's really hard to see yourself, working on something. You'd think because there's so much motion picture just out there that there'd be a lot of good like examples, but usually the only examples you can find are ones that are like used in movies, and they never say what part of what movie was shot with what film.
Right.
So you're kind of left up to like the home movie shooters, kind of like us, and what we kind of provide. This is kind of a nice way to not just see the footage, but maybe hear a little bit about what went into it. Kind of think
Yep.
about this like how we used to do like extensive Flickr research on different film stocks before you buy that bulk of expired film stock or something.
Let's get right to it. This is an orthochromatic 200 to 400 ISO film, 8 millimeter, that I use the Keystone K8 camera. And the reason I used it is because it's my most reliable camera. Now we're talking about grain.
It looks like it's got quite a bit.
Yeah. So this film, and I'm really happy to share it because I think people really need to see what they're getting. Take into consideration that there is some compression going on through YouTube when
hmm
you're watching. We all have different creative projects, and for some people, maybe this is what they would be interested in shooting their project with.
So that sky is looking like a little bit darker. You're not using a filter or anything? That's just like straight up?
In order to shoot 2 to 400 ISO
hmm
movie film, I'm using a neutral density filter.
Oh, okay. So that's probably adding to that kind of that punch down in the sky. The highlights are doing something really, really interesting. They almost look, I don't know, it almost looks everything looks like silvery on the bright side of things. Is that because of the camera or is that because of the film?
It's because of the film.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely the film.
So it's just like any of the other X-ray films where it kind of has that the highlights when they go, they just like have that kind of glow to them.
In 8 millimeter, I strive for fine grain. Like when I'm shooting 8
hmm
millimeter, I'm looking for the finest grain I can find. And this is the opposite. I mean, it says it right on the package, orthochromatic, high contrast, high grain. For here, I didn't use the ND filter clearly.
Oh, it's getting blown. So this is really interesting. You can see that the highlights are like blooming all through, even like out the edges of the film. And that's
Oh,
also because the black and white doesn't have a rem jet, right? It's just a regular film.
no remjet. I mean, you could shoot this film from between 100 and 400 ISO. I like 200 ISO. I think that's the sweet spot.
hmm
Film tests in any movie format using a vintage camera.
hmm
I mean, Matt, they're not scientific at all. For example, this
hmm
Keystone made in the 1930s. Do I know that the motor is actually running at 16 frames per second? So
Exactly.
when I say, "Oh, I'm shooting this at 200 ISO and this is what it looks like," it's like, no, there's no.
Yeah, not everything's not like completely locked down, right? Because it's when was the last time the motor was serviced?
Yep.
Can you trust the lenses? These aren't lenses with like T-stops, right? They're just
Nope.
like they're mild suggestions on these tiny little lenses. So the best you can hope for is to run a film through them that has, that like a healthier dynamic range. And
Yeah.
the FPP X-ray film, at least from what I've seen in the 8 millimeter and seen in 35 and 120, is this is a film where you pretty much have to be right on. And it's one of the few black and white films where you don't want to overexpose it that much. You really want to have your exposure. It's almost like working with slide film, maybe even just a tad
Yep.
under on some instances. But the grain is, if you don't like grain, you're in for it.
Yep. So, folks, what do you need to know about FPP black and white X-ray film in 8 millimeter? There's a limited supply. If you like this, buy it because when this goes out of stock, unless there's a high demand, we're not going to bring it back in. And that's very important to think about too, folks who shoot movie film. It's like we all just think that our favorite film is always just going to be there, and that's just not the case. It takes massive amounts of mountain moving to actually get the product in-house
hmm
because there's so many cogs spinning at the same time, finding the film, finding the facility to perf the film, getting
Mhm.
the film packaged. And this is all happening sometimes in different countries. And this film is bouncing all over the world
And
to
all
get.
manufacturers do this. Nobody's doing everything all in one place.
So what do you need to know? You need to know this is 200 to 400 ISO film. It's
Hmm.
orthochromatic. You can shoot this with tungsten lights. Surprisingly, which we'll see in our other video for 16 millimeter, I did a tungsten test. You can
Okay.
use indoor lights. You don't have to really change the ISO. I was shocked to find that it uh, captured a beautiful image in tungsten light. Neutral density and ND filters are a must to have in your bag if you're going to shoot this film in daylight.
Especially with these older cameras, right? Because a lot of the older 8 millimeter cameras, they weren't made for, like medium and high speed films,
No.
which this is kind of scooting that line. So you definitely want, even in a cloudy day, you probably want like a small ND on there to kind of help you out.
Yep. In the 1960s, when this format was popular, black and white film was ISO 10 and color film Kodachrome was ISO 25, which is why you see those old videos, parents and grandparents had those light bars,
Hmm.
whereas, you had to literally blast
Yeah, and those
thousands
were
of.
all those were all like halogen bulbs. They were just like blaring.
Let me try to wrap this up. High grain,
Hmm.
high contrast, orthochromatic. You need a neutral density filter in your bags. I carry a ND2, 4, and 8, I guess.
Okay.
And
Hmm.
that's one stop, two stop, three stops.
Yep.
Grab it while you can. Do you have any questions?
No, have your meter handy, I guess would be a good one. You really don't want to, this is not a film that is going to be super forgiving if you underexpose it. But it's also going to do some really wacky things if you overexpose it. So have that
Right.
meter handy. Know what your effective shutter speed is on your camera.
It's important for everyone to get their basics down, which is
Mhm.
16 frames per second. Gives you approximately 1/30th of a second shutter speed.
Yep.
And have a lens that goes to at least f16, f22, even better. I know this is all easy to say because I've been shooting for such a long time. I'm seeing the results here at FPP as people are sending their movie film in to be, developed and scanned.
Hmm.
And it's best to kind of get all these practice makes perfect, right, Matt?
Yeah. So whatever you plan on shooting, grab an extra roll and run that through as a
Yeah.
test just to make
Yeah.
sure.
I know it's expensive. This is an expensive hobby. Best to, plan your project and always shoot a test roll because a lot of folks are just excited about getting a new camera, but then have never shot a roll through it.
Definitely.
Comments down below, podcast at filmphotographyproject.com if you want to send me an email. Limited edition 8 millimeter X-ray film.